So the project that turned into the Willys Whippet, it started with an idea back in 2010 when I really was in love with a turbo 4-cylinder engine that I had in my Dodge Neon SRT4. It was lightweight, made pretty good power, and I really enjoyed kind of the feel of a turbocharged engine. So what my master plan was, after visiting my family farm and looking at some of the older cars that we had there, was to put kind of the turbo 4-cylinder with the transaxle in the back of a car of that area, custom build my own frame, and kind of take it from there. So originally I was looking at a S6 sedan that we had, but just looking at how rough the body was and just the dimensions of the SRT4 kind of drivetrain versus the kind of the back end of that S6, it just wasn't going to work out. So the project really kind of took hold when I found on a salvage website a Dodge Neon SRT4 that was totaled, but the entire drivetrain was together. So what I did is called my dad and said, hey, I'd really appreciate it if you can drive a few hours out of your way and go and pick up this car while I'm at work. So he went there and loaded it on the trailer, brought it home, and I drove out about the 8-hour drive to the family farm on my next time off, and took the car, chopped it all up, took all the interior out of it, loaded it in my SRT10 truck, drove it back and sold it to some car guys that I knew that were looking for something similar. A lot of Neon guys use that SRT4 interior stuff to kind of upgrade their cars, so it was pretty easy to sell, and just from the sale of the interior stuff, I was able to more or less pay off the total vehicle that I bought. After that, my next time home, I went a little bit more serious. So I rented a U-Haul trailer, a little 12-foot trailer, and the SRT10 truck has a 0 rated towing capacity, but that didn't stop me. So we hooked up to the trailer, pulled it home. We took the front end of the totaled SRT4 and cut it clean through, more or less just behind like your A-pillar on the front end. Loaded that into the trailer. Then I went looking at the vehicles that my dad had on the farm and found this 1929 Willys Whippet. We chopped it all up and essentially took home whatever body panels were left. I've got some pictures that I'll be adding to the video here to show you what I started with, but it sure wasn't very much. When I got home, it was quite an endeavor to get everything unloaded. I guess this was when I first bought my very first house and had my first garage with absolutely no tools or not really anything to make this project happen. I had a cheapy little grinder that I bought at Canadian Tire, which is about as cheap as you can get. The disc package that I got from there, and that was pretty much it, just some hand tools. I chopped up the rest of the front end once I got it offloaded in the garage and stripped it down, so I just had the kind of the front K-member, the coilovers, and the engine and transmission off the Willys, or off the Neon. From there I took essentially just the body panels that remained from that Willys Whippet and pieced them over top of that back end or the front end of that SRT4, and used a couple chunks of the stock frame of the Whippet and kind of mocked everything up together. So it wasn't a very easy project because for numerous reasons. One, the frame wasn't going to be symmetrical as it went around the SRT4 front end that is now mounted in the rear. It takes a different kind of contour frame to meet up with the trans mount on the one side of the frame versus the engine mount on the other. And if you think of the center line of the wheels, those aren't centered among the kind of side to side on a vehicle. So I had to get a bit creative in how I made that frame, but it turned out pretty well, I think. And then the front half, I used the stock rails for about, I'd say 3/4 of the front of the car. And in the very front, I ended up putting a Fat Man Mustang 2 independent front suspension on it, which is a fantastic kit. Took quite a bit of modification to make it work. The Willys is a very, very narrow car, which we'll talk about a little bit more later too. But so once I got the frame all kind of roughed in. I tried to get the body panels to all fit on top of it. And when you look at the original Willys, it was not in great condition for two reasons mainly. There were some panels that were just gone, period, that I had to remake from scratch. The doors were absolutely destroyed. I'm not sure what happened to them, but they were more or less just rolled up tin cans. Or I should say the door panels, there was no door framing to speak of. And the body, originally it was framed with wood. So imagine a wood skeleton on the inside of it that had the metal then fitted on the outside and nailed through onto this wooden frame. And then they took molten lead and leaded all these joints. So lots of wonderful things that didn't really last the last 90 years that car has been around. So all in all, what ended up happening was once the body all rotted away, the metal frame or the metal bodywork just kind of tilted off to the side and didn't really have much shape or geometry left to it. So it was quite a challenge to get it all squared up and more or less back to the original dimensions that it was. I ended up going with no swinging outdoors and also converting it to a convertible. So by doing that, it helped me really make the body rigid and give it a little bit more structure. It helped me maintain all the dimensions. And also, for how many times the body went on and off this car, I have to say I'm really glad I made it in the style that I did, because I built a hoist on the roof of my garage and was able to lift the body clear of the frame with the hoist off the roof, roll the frame out with the engine, transmission, everything already still in it, do whatever work I needed to do, and then I could reassemble to validate clearances and things like that. So turned out pretty well. Some of the interesting things I had to do to get that rear assembly to work. So if you think of the front suspension on a car, it has steering on it. So to kind of lock the steering in place, I ended up putting some longer, I guess similar to a panhard bar that you would have on a 4-link. I put 2 of those to the steering arms on those front knuckles that are now mounted in the rear of the car to lock them in position. And from a geometry perspective, I had to be careful so that as your suspension goes through its travel, that it doesn't cause you a bunch of toe in or toe out as the suspension moves through its geometry. In terms of the engine itself, it went from, it's a 2.4 liter, had a smaller TD04 turbo stock. So stock, the engine made about 230 horsepower. Originally, I'd planned to put the Neon SRT4, they call it the Stage 3 upgrade on it. And I actually put it on for a while. It involves a bigger turbo, different engine controller, bigger injectors, kind of all of that type of stuff. But the problem I was running into making all that stock Neon SRT4 stuff work is that it relies on a whole bunch of sensors and emission stuff that I didn't plan on using, and frankly I didn't even have. So that included like evap and a whole bunch of stuff like that. So I ended up having to abandon using a stock style computer on this because I just couldn't figure out a way to make everything work together. So once I did that, I ended up selling that whole Stage 3 kit, and with the proceeds from that I bought a new, kind of a pretty nice actually, tubular turbo manifold, mounted a eBay turbo on it that should be good for about 400 horsepower, and then fabricated my own custom exhaust and oil pickup and return and things like that to kind of make it all work. So honestly, I'm pretty happy with how it all turned out. And then on the charge pipe system, I looked at, for an intercooler, a whole bunch of different options. It was really close to getting a stock SRT4 front mount intercooler to work right near the back of the car. It kind of fit between the frame rails, but the big downer for it was I just couldn't get it to mount in between the frame rails in a spot that wouldn't be kind of my scrub line, meaning if it is the lowest point of the car. So if anything, whether it's a speed bump or curb or whatever ends up coming underneath the car, it would have hit it and it would have destroyed it because it's just aluminum and then I would have been stranded with a car that's not running very well. So I ended up going with an air-to-water system. So the air-to-water interchange is mounted underneath the kind of the driver's compartment there, and then I put a radiator for the water system that is with a fan mounted underneath the driver's seat. So that should keep everything nice and cool and keep it so that it's at least no worse than atmospheric temperature when we're running kind of that intercooler process. I did a little bit more body modifications after that. So the body modifications would be that on the front side, at the cowl area, I modified it so that before it had kind of the very vertical windshield posts and framing and things like that that were there to mount the wooden canvas top that was on it previously. I don't plan on having any sort of a top on this at all. So I ended up kind of extending the cowl. I felt like it extended or kind of improved the proportions of the car. Also put on the back side where the body used to kind of curve up at the end of the deck lid and things like that. All around the body used to curve up quite a bit to mount this wooden framed canvas roof. I smoothed all that down to kind of give it a more smooth body line. Also body modification on the back, the fenders were quite narrow. So if you think originally this car had wood wheels, wood rim wheels that were a pretty good diameter, so the fender diameter wasn't a problem, but the width was very, very narrow. I wanted to have some decent sized tires under the back of this, so I ended up putting in a 3-inch wide kind of a section in all the two rear fenders to widen that out to give me some more space. Also at the back, underneath the deck lid, there wasn't really much in terms of bodywork, kind of where the rear fenders ended and the bodywork ended at the back to kind of mount anything. So I built myself a rear valance that has the brake lights in it, has the exhaust outlet in it for that custom exhaust for the turbo that I talked about. Yeah, it turned out pretty well. Also on the sides, I felt that when you looked at it, first off, there was no running boards. The running boards were wood framed originally, and they had more or less disintegrated so that there was absolutely nothing left. So what I did is I built my own out of 16 gauge steel, and off the frame of the car itself, I built some supports that are welded to the frame that the body has these running boards mounted to it kind of rests on. So that makes it so, because the doors are closed permanently, meaning no doors, you can actually climb up and over by stepping on the running boards and going over, and you won't damage any of the running boards because they are very, very well framed. So it was quite fun. That was my first attempt at metal forming 16 gauge steel without the usual brakes and things like that. And I have a metal table that I would take this 16 gauge steel, clamp it up against the edge, use some angle iron, use a hammer, use a bit of a torch, and more or less by brute force and ignorance get the steel formed to the profile that I wanted. So that turned out pretty well. But then I noticed when I looked at it from the side view that I felt the side profile just didn't look very well proportioned. So what I did is I shortened the kind of the side skirt, I guess, from the body down between the body and the running board. There was a panel that runs across there. I shortened it by about 3 inches. And what that allowed me to do is lower the overall car while maintaining that ground clearance. So I just think it helped kind of maintain the kind of the look of the car that I was really after. Up front of the car, some couple interesting things would be the fuel cell. So I looked at numerous fuel cells that they sell aftermarket, and unfortunately none of them were the shape and the kind of the capacity that I was looking for. So what I ended up doing is using my newfound 16 gauge steel fabrication skills, made my own tank that fits just in front of the firewall. Bent it all up, welded it all up, sealed it all up, and then sent it to a nice shop in Calgary called Citywide Radiator, I believe they're called, City Radiator. And they pressure tested it for me. They did a internal coating Did a whole bunch of stuff to help me out. So what's cool is that initially I was thinking I was going to have to open up kind of the side hoods on the front of the car to be able to fill the gas tank with gas. But I routed a tube so that it comes out the cowl. There's a cowl vent. So when that opens up, that's going to be my fuel filler door. So that's where I'll be filling up the gas tank, which is kind of sitting in the front of the car. Also up front is the radiator. So the radiator is just I think it's an aftermarket Model A aluminum radiator. And then to tie it back to the engine, I looked at a bunch of different options for piping and was getting kind of frustrated with how expensive everything was going to be, or how heavy it was, or how hard to work with. What I ended up settling on is aluminized exhaust piping. So I ran 2 runs, one front to back, so both your feed and your return are like that. And then I ended up going into a nice shop in my hometown there that let me kind of peruse their selection of radiator hoses, because I had to find the right dimension in versus or diameter in, diameter out, the right profile, everything else like that to make it all work. And obviously I couldn't look in a catalog and make this all work. It kind of took a bit of trial and error. So I really appreciate the help that I had with those guys for that. And then kind of at the very, very front for headlights, I ended up mounting them to the side of the grill shell. So the stock ones, there was a headlight bar that mounted between the 2 fenders. I didn't really like that, just for how I felt that look was kind of boxy and not very smooth. And so by mounting these 2 headlights to the side of the grill shell, it really helped out smooth out the body lines as well. So in the end, I've got some pictures I'll put in the video here, but I'm really happy with how the body of the car looks, like how the overall profile and everything else looks. Also with how the stance of the car ended up. I bought just some rims and tires. It's always a challenge when you do a project like this with mismatched bolt patterns on front versus rear rims. So you think, man, I really like that style of rims, but does it come in a 5x100 for the back and a 5x125 in the front? If it doesn't, then it was kind of out of the picture. So I had to do some fun stuff with brims and spacers and adapters and stuff to get rims and tires to work, but it works pretty well and it's slammed pretty well down. The coilovers in the back do have some adjustments, so I know in the pictures it looks like I'm more or less sitting on the fenders, but I can adjust that quite a bit at the back. For other mechanical stuff, I guess, the wiring for the car, I put a painless wiring harness in it. That'll control lights, horn, fuel pump, cooling fan, all that other fun stuff. Then for the engine controller itself, like I mentioned before, the stock computer wasn't working for me because of all the things that it was dependent on, and you couldn't really work around very easily. So I got a Megasquirt ECU. So Megasquirt is more or less a program it yourself engine controller, and they give you just a standard harness, a universal harness that says hook this one up to your injectors 1 through 8, in my instance 1 through 4, hook this up to your map sensor, your oil pressure sensor, your intake air temperature sensor, your all that other stuff. You hook up this wiring harness to whatever sensors you want, and then once you get through all of that, it'll control both ignition and fuel. And you can have it vary by all the usual parameters, whether it's atmospheric temperature, or all that other stuff, starting enrichment, things like that. So yeah, the car got very, very close to running. So the fuel system is complete, cooling system's complete, wiring I would say is about 95% complete. I got a couple sensors I was trying to troubleshoot in the back to get it all to work. But I ended up stalling out on the project for a couple reasons. One is from a life perspective. When I started the project, I had no kids, and by the time I got to this point in the project where we were talking with the body all together and stuff, I had 3 kids, and it's hard to get 3 kids and a wife in a 2-seat car. Also, I'd been moving around a fair bit for work, and it was just a big challenge to try to make this all happen. Also, there was a couple technical challenges that I'm kind of still stumped on. One of which is the shift linkage. So when you think of the front engine setup on this car originally, the shifter mounted in the driver's compartment had the shift cables coming out of the front of it, which came into the back of the transmission. So the movement or your actuation of the shift linkage kind of worked in that type of an orientation. Now I've more or less reversed that completely, which means that there's no bracketry to hold it together, means the shifter is not set up to have the cables exiting out the back of the shifter. I tried a few different things and haven't been able to find something that worked consistently, because the last thing I want to do is get this car together and running and well, and then just be fighting the shifts off of everything that I'm doing, right? And then the second thing is just the complexity of setting up my own programming from scratch for this Mega Squirt ECU. Initially I thought it wouldn't be too bad, that I could copy some programming from somebody else and kind of make it work, but I honestly have really struggled to kind of make that all work. So the plan is, once I get back and finish this little girl, this Buick, and get it running and running well, that I can have it as a dependable driver for me and my family, that I'll jump back on that Willys and I won't be defeated, won't be beat down, we'll make it happen.